Hi, my name is Andrew McLaren. We're going to talk about research projects in science and how you can really get students to improve that using some feedback. And you can see this is also part of the NGSS, so you really do need to do this in science. And it's oftentimes a neglected part where we're focusing more on like models or content. We really do need to do some sort of research here. So basically in this video, I'll talk about why we would use a database while doing this, as well as how to get help using these databases. Librarians, they're amazing. And then I'm going to show you some older research assignments that have kind of inspired me to think about how I can change this, as well as my current assessment that I've built around the NGSS Appendix F to be specific to those expectations. It does seem to have some overlap with what I do with CER, but most people aren't going to do like such specific things with sources and procedures and that kind of stuff in a CER. So you probably will need to do something like this to cover those components of science. Okay. So our students, when they have a question, most of the time they'll either Google it or they'll go on TikTok and see what people on TikTok are recommending they do. So it's really important that students break that habit of getting untrustworthy sources from search engines. They could use Google Scholar, absolutely, to do some research, but that's pretty unwieldy for most students, especially at like a middle school level. So you really want to use like a database that's designed for students at that age. And most states will have some sort of database, like OSLIS, I think is what Oregon has, which is a part of Gale, which is a bigger organization. So you want to actually get these databases with articles that are written for students, and they oftentimes let you search for like Lexile numbers so you can get things specific for your students. Even if you're teaching like sixth grade, but your students are reading at like a third grade level, you can find readings for them using these databases, and they can also find readings themselves. So you can either give things to them from the database, or you can have students kind of go on the database, but you'll have much better sources. They're actually written by experts in the field, and it's a very powerful thing for students to actually understand how a database works and what it is. And you should be able to get access to this using your tech specialist or librarian within your building and district. You should also have the students look at uncredible sources. So you do want to, before you actually have them do their research project, show them some uncredible sources and evaluate those things. So you can go on Google to do that, but when they do their research, they should be getting trustworthy sources from this database. So to actually use these databases, you're going to need a little bit of help the first time. So I would just go to your librarian and have them show you how they access it. So you're going to probably be using either something like Gale or OSLIS. So if you just Google OSLIS, this is what comes up. It's an Oregon School Library information system. And this you can, as an educator or student, access these things if you have a school sign in. So you should be able to go on to these various databases. So there's like a database for high school students and for middle school students. I actually also really like their videos that they have on how to overview OSLIS and what is a database. Those are pretty good things to show students. This should allow you to just click on here. If you have school information, you should be able to just kind of plug that in and get signed in. It should be pretty straightforward. Again, talk to your librarian if you're having a hard time with that. If you're not at like a public school, if you're at a private school or like homeschooled, you can still access these databases like Gale. If you just search Gale, you'll see this. They do have access if you have a public library card to these databases. So what I did was I just was trying to read one of them, like just one of the articles or get access to some part of Gale. And because I'm signed in now, it's letting me search for the stuff, but it asked for like my library information. So I was trying to, let me just show you. So the easiest way to show you this is if we just go to school educators and then we select middle school. This is going to show you the database for middle school students. And then on this website, if you don't have access through a school, you can still get access to a lot of these things through your library. So, for example, the middle school database is included with my library card that I have, and then you can use this to search, very similar to how you would with the regular database if you were in school. So there's ways to access Gale even if you're on your own. Um, so you should be able to use a database to do some research. So these are some research assignments that I've done in the past. I wouldn't really call them an assessment because they didn't really have a rubric and they're kind of unclear. But I've had students look up things where I've given them like some slides and they had to like finish those slides or complete them. And so this is like one of my first attempts at a research project where I had them go just online and look up some information. Looks like this was .govs that they used, so they were using like good sources like .gov, .org, but some .orgs are not trustworthy. So you do get some weird things if you just let them Google and justify something from any source, right? And so this is kind of an example of what you might do for a research project, just kind of like around a specific performance expectation. So I think this was around artificial selection, and there's specific parts asking like why were they created, who created them, and how has this led to scientific discoveries. And so I just kind of had them go through these parts of the performance expectation and just tell me a little blurb, and that kind of worked. It wasn't perfect. I honestly thought it like there was some bizarre things that kids put in some of those projects that were just completely inaccurate from an untrustworthy source. And we weren't really evaluating the source and its credibility there. We were just kind of getting information and bringing it all together onto one series of slides, which it kind of worked. And then for a different group of students, I was at a different school and I'd actually done some work around Gale on like professional development. And so what I discovered was that you can just get like PDFs of readings. So I've got like the URL of the reading, and I also have like the PDF just in my Google Drive. And so I got trustworthy sources for them, printed it out for them, and then did a jigsaw activity. And this worked out pretty well because they were good sources. They had different pieces of information that they're getting from these interesting things around artificial selection and the technologies. And then I basically said, summarize this and tell me any questions and concerns that you have. So they weren't really evaluating like the credibility of the sources at all. And it's just kind of like summarize, right? So just pull information from all these things, which is definitely part of what we want them to do, but it's very unclear. Like if I was a student trying to do this project, I I would do my best, but I wouldn't really know exactly what makes the difference between an A and a B. You know, it's a little bit unclear in some of those aspects. So that was pretty good in terms of like actually getting them to use good sources, getting them to use Gale. Um, but I gave them all everything, and they didn't really do much research. It was also kind of the group of students you know, sometimes you're like, yeah, if I give you guys this time, you're gonna not do the research. So I've got some slides here that I used for a week to do a research project with Gale. I thought it worked pretty well. Basically, this had them kind of pick some things that I had already picked out for them, and then they also, at the end of the week, did their own research project where they went on to Gale and tried to find some articles on some other synthetic material. So this whole week is like, here's a little bit of scaffolding. Here's some examples of Gale and articles and looking at those articles and talking about things that are relevant. And then at the very end of the week, there's an assignment where they do their own research. So you can kind of see there's some discussions from the previous week and some tech tips to help them get ready for like doing research and writing and reading and all that stuff. So it's good to have those supports, right, for students who need that. Then basically some student helped me get some screenshots of going through logging in with Gale. I ended up making also a video for this, uh, but this was just one way that you could have students see how to get logged in so they can get onto Gale. So I just kind of wanted to show that to them right at the beginning because I knew some of them were going to go through the week pretty quick and want to get going on the research. This was during COVID, so everyone was kind of going at their own pace a little bit. So you can kind of see that I gave them some instructions on how to log in. There was also on one of the days they had some readings that were in Gale, so they could actually see what this looks like when you're actually doing a reading in Gale. I think I had one that wasn't as good of a source. And so like I had like different students from different birthdays, they had different assigned readings, and then they would come together and share what they learned about their synthetic chemical together in this larger discussion. It's kind of like a little bit of a jigsaw as well. And you can kind of, yeah, you can see now they want me to log in here with the school for that particular thing. So there was a number of things that they got additional information from. And then I thought it was important to just kind of like to do a little timeout from the research and talk about what is bias. And so I've got like some videos that I linked in there. You can see this is just something from YouTube, I think, that we found. And then there was, I think this is the Gale video, I believe. Yeah, this is actually from Ocelus. So you can see like Ocelus has a video on databases, and I had my students watch that so they understood what it was that we were working and why we're working with those things. Just a little review of that, those types of like bigger picture. Why do we do research projects and why do we trust some sources more, right? And then I gave them some readings. Some were from Gale, some were not, and they could pick them. And then there was again some sort of discussion. So they were looking at this stuff. Here they were talking more about, was the article like fair and accurate? Do they have bias? So this is getting them to like think about some of those aspects, right? And then there was like an easier thing where I was like, okay, just check out this video for some more background information about chemicals and how we use chemicals and synthetic processes. So that's not super critical for the actual research. But here's the actual slides I used for the research. So I said you had to do one, like pick one of these chemicals, go onto Gale, look it up, and see what you can find out about it. And I want you to tell me the pros and cons and if this is safe enough for us to be using. So that's kind of directly related to this particular performance expectation about like, are these synthetic materials safe? What are the pros and cons of them? That kind of stuff. And then, yeah, they could do one of their own choice or one of these four that I've kind of limited to them to. So if you're trying to do another research project, you could take this slide and change it. So you could have, instead of like four synthetic chemicals, you could maybe have like, I don't know, four biomes that they could do research about, or whatever the question is that they're needing to do research on. You give them a couple choices, and then they can go onto the database and try and find some information about that. And you should give them some sort of question or claim to be trying to focus in on that's related to that performance expectation. So my current assessment for research is based off of the Appendix F and the language that you see in that for like the obtaining, evaluating, communicating information in the middle school band. So I looked at this and tried to think about like the high school and the elementary, kind of what they're saying, and break that into some categories that I could use in a rubric and give students like numerical scores, like how are you doing with this skill? How are you doing with that skill? So that was my overarching goal. But if you look at this, it very closely lines up with what we were doing in the last research project around synthetic materials that I was talking about. Like I had the right idea, but I didn't have a rubric or a nice way of measuring students' ability to do that research or understand like the source piece. I didn't actually score that at all like an assessment. It was just assignment. Did you do it or not? So if you really actually do research, you want students to get some feedback with that skill so they can do a better job next year, right? It's not just like, did you do the research, but do you understand how to find a good source? Do you know how to put all the pieces of information together? That kind of stuff. So like this summary. So if you look at this, basically there's 3 articles that I expect them to look at, and they're going to get that from a database. And there's some instruction slides. So basically, this is an example of a prompt. So I just took the synthetic material prompt, and they pick one of these 4 things, and they find 3 articles about that. Um, and then for each one of those articles, there this is an alternative thing. This is like maybe you want to give them the articles, you could do that. And so then they pick 3 from this. So they're either doing their own research for this, or you can kind of give them the articles. That's okay to give them the articles, kind of thinking about teachers. Some of them are going to want to do more scaffolding here, some are going to want to let students do their own thing. And so basically, you give them the instructions on how to use the database. I think there was also that video that I had on that slide up there. Yeah, I had a little tutorial video on how you use the Gale advanced search, and also a link taking them to the advanced search as well, so they could just do the search easily. So for each source, they needed to tell me what the title was of the source. Then I also want them to take some notes on that source, so they could highlight the concepts. So like yellow for the main idea and blue for the key concepts. And then there's some data here that they need to be able to pull out from the reading. So I thought there's qualitative and quantitative language. Those words are used in the NGSS here. So we should have them maybe do a dotted line for qualitative and a solid line for quantitative, just so we know that they know which one's which. And then they should also circle the source. So if there's a name of a person or an institution, or like a nonprofit or something like that, they should circle that so that they're identifying the sources there. So there's kind of like this, like, take your notes on the document, and this will honestly just kind of help you with the students find where they did wrong, you know. Then the next couple slides, they're organizing their information, so they're just kind of rewriting it. So they can rewrite what the central idea is and any other key concepts for that source. Then there's a different category where they need to kind of combine or integrate some pieces of information or some data. And so they need to write out the qualitative, quantitative data, and then describe how this supports some idea. So they'll have their ideas from the previous section. They've got some data here, and then they're going to also analyze the source's bias and its accuracy and describe that. So they'll answer a couple questions here, and then they'll put like a little summary where they rewrite all of the ideas and the data, and they put that in here. So they put all of that together. And then if there's any figures that they think are very, very important, they should put that on here as well. And then describe which source is kind of like the best source. So they need to compare all the sources in some way, shape, or form. So those are like the 4 categories. And they're going to get scored on that for this first source based on this rubric. 3 points being possible for each category. So they do their first source, they get scored on their understanding of reading, combining data, looking at sources, and then doing that communication and writing piece. So there's like the 4 main components, and those are directly pulled from the NGSS, that language in Appendix F. And then they're going to need to do the same thing for a different source. And they're going to do the same thing for a third source. So long story short, they're doing some notes on this source, and then they're going to rewrite the information in kind of like notes, and then they're going to do a summary. So if you look at like doing a research project, that's pretty much those main skills there. The problem is that this has a huge overlap with my expectations for claim evidence reasoning. Like the data components being quantitative and qualitative, that's like basically my evidence in claim evidence reasoning. And then the central idea, this might be like your claim. And then these key concepts, those might be like things that are like reasoning that supports that central idea. So this is going to be kind of like that reasoning component. So it's kind of like CER that's been jumbled around, but it also has source explicitly um, assessed here. Like normally in a CER, you wouldn't look at the source. I do. I require that for my students to say like, where does this information come from? And I have a whole video on CER if you want to check that out. But normally people don't require that. And then you can kind of think about this communication writing piece. It is very similar to the CER. There is some stuff where you're comparing the different pieces of information, but you usually include that in your reasoning anyways when you're doing a CER. So a lot of these expectations line up with CER. And because of that, I wanted to make an alternative version of this that's just looking at the source and bias. It's not really worrying about key ideas. It's not worrying about evidence. I really think that that's measured more in like your CER, which would kind of cover this practice 8. I think it also relates to the 6 and 7 CER. So I think it's okay to do a research project and a CER, and you'd kind of cover all those practices. But in any case, this is an alternative version where basically it looks the same, but instead of having them focus in on, pardon me, instead of having them focus in on all those different aspects, we're just looking at the source, bias, and accuracy. And then we're going to do that 3 times. So you can look at those 3 sources and have them assess the credibility of those 3 sources and give them a final score. So this also could be like, you could do this as an average. You could also add them up. There's a number of ways you could determine the final score. If you look at equitable grading, they'll say that you should just do the most consistent score. So if they get like, if they got like a 2 and then a 3 and then another 2, you might just give them a 2 as their final score for the skill. Because yeah, sure, they displayed a 3 level once, but consistently they were at a 2 level, right? So that can be an average, or you can do some equitable grading with that. Yeah, I think that's most of it. Oh, I did want to show you this in Google Classroom, how to do this assessment. So I'll show you that in just a second. So to make this assignment in Google Classroom, it's pretty straightforward. You just basically do what you would do for most assessments, but we're gonna need to be careful with the rubric section here. Also, I like to have topics because if you're doing a research project, it's nice for them to know everything that's related to that, right? And so you can see that we've got our, I think this was 12 points, what we did for this research project. And then you would just select it from your slides. I'm going to have all of this on Teachers Pay Teachers. So if you're wanting a copy of this, you should be able to just see that there for sale with like all the rubrics and everything in Sheets, because that's very, very easy to import here. So you can just import directly from the sheets that will be in that folder. I think we want this one. Yeah. So this has the rubric already made. That'll save you a lot of time kind of making those different sections. And the way I did it was, it's kind of weird, but basically they're going to get some feedback in the rubric, which will correlate to the final score, but it's not exactly 1 point to 1 point. So you make the assignment, you've assigned it, right? And then you can, if we look at what looks like when you view the assignment, you can look at some student work. And so you can score it, and you can see that I've got some examples of, like, I've plugged in some numbers here. This would normally be blank, but maybe they, for their first source, you know, they got a 3 out of 3. The first combining and integrating, they got a 3 out of 3, 3 out of 3, right? So they did very well. It looks like source on numbers, source 2, this part they didn't do too well on, so the credibility and whatnot, that source bias and whatnot, they didn't do very well on this section. So you can kind of plug in all these numbers here, right? And it will give you an automatically calculated average. So if you just want to do like the average, it will give you that and do that for you. But I don't really like doing that. So instead of just doing simple averages, you can kind of log it on this table and it's all off to the side. So you can kind of grade them, put the numbers off to the side, get to the bottom and just kind of plug them into the table. And then the final score here, this could be the average. It could be the most common score. It's kind of up to the teacher how they want to do that. And then I think that this was 3 possible points times 4, so it was 12 total points, right? So that's one way to do this. And then also I want to mention that you can do like the comment bank. My caps lock was reversed on this. So you could do like some comment that you're going to be using a lot. And you can put those in the comment bank. And then you can very quickly put that comment on there. So you could be like, oh, they accidentally labeled these things wrongly. I think, yeah. Yeah. So if you start typing the words in, the common comments in your bank will pop up. And so you can kind of use that to quickly write some comments on here. So the common comments in that rubric should help you with speeding up this grading, though personally, this research project to me, with how it's set up with the grading, seems very, very redundant with CER. So I'm kind of leaning towards not doing the one that I was first designing and just focusing on evaluating sources, just because that is going to make the grading so much more feasible. And you'll also be measuring like their ability to identify evidence and ideas and stuff in the CER. So that's kind of where I'm at with research. Thank you for joining me. This has been Andrew McLaren. Thank you for McLearning with me. I've got a few more offers that I'd like to let you know about. And remember, like and subscribe. For each video on YouTube, I am making an interactive version using HP5. These will be for sale on Podia. And if you click on the link in the video, you should be able to go directly to that product. I also have 2 demos I'm going to be linking so you can kind of see what these products look like. So I would recommend checking out those demos. I also offer one-on-one remote tutoring through Wyzant. Please use the links that I have linked below. That way I can get 100% of the hourly rate as opposed to 75. Each video also has a link for my Patreon, and you can join at the $3 level to get some resources I use for tutoring or to support the channel. And I also have a $5 raffle level, which you could either get some free online tutoring or 5 interactive lessons for free. You choose which ones. And then I also have my Teachers Pay Teachers, which has some old lessons that I made from when I used to be a teacher. I may be adding to that. Thank you for spending your time with me. I hope that you learned something.